G'day, I'm Jan Wasitsky and I'm here in the Castlemaine Art Gallery and Museum with Doug Ralph. Doug Ralph is a local identity. He's a political activist, a sometime Greenie candidate for Parliament, but he is the originator of the modern celebrations of the Monster Meeting, and we're here today to talk about the Monster Meeting, the Gold Rush and other related matters. Welcome. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Doug, what's your connection and your family's connection with this place?
Well, my family were Cornish miners. They came out here from Cornwall in 1849. It was the time when the South Australian government was offering free fares for people to come out here, and there was large numbers of Cornish people came out here. They came from a little place called Crowan in Cornwall, which is just near St Earth in the middle of Cornwall. They came out here at and settled in a place called Reedy Creek over near the Barossa Valley, where they were working in the copper mines. And when gold was discovered over here in Victoria, they all, I think South Australia was almost deserted when most of the people took off and came over here to look for gold. And as far as I know, they arrived here in 1851. On the way over here, a baby was born and a little girl was born. And according to family history, she was born in the Black Forest on the way up to the goldfields, and her date of birth is 1851. So I've been able to determine that, pretty sure that they were here in 1851, and hopefully they were turned up for the Monster Meeting when that was happening. So yeah, we've had a long connection with this area. My family, the Ralphs settled in Maldon in 1853. They were some of the first people to settle there, and the first white child born there was Elizabeth Ralph, and they stayed there in the spot where they first set up their camp for well over 100 years, and the two houses that they occupied are still there, and they're still descendants of the family in the district. And we've been miners and woodcutters and a whole range of occupations, and I guess we've made a bit of a contribution to the local scene.
And you were born here?
Yeah, I was born in Castlemaine in 1948. So.
All right, let's skip forward to 1995. You were the originator of the modern celebrations of the Monster Meeting of 1851. Can you tell us, how did it come about? How did you discover about the Monster Meeting?
Yeah, that was an interesting time around 1995. There was a lot of interest in local history at that time. Robin and Neer and David Bernier had arrived in Castlemaine. They were doing a lot of research and created a lot of interest in the local history. And Robin had found an article in the Argus newspaper at the time, which talked about the great meeting of diggers, and were pretty vague about where it had happened and what it was all about. And at that same time, the Kennett government had sacked all the local councils in Victoria and replaced them with commissioners, and there was a lot of pretty emotional time where a lot of people were pretty upset that they'd lost their democratic rights to have a say in what was going on in their local community. The commissioners had set themselves up in the town hall, and pretty hard to communicate with. And
before we go on, why had the Kennett government replaced councillors with Victorian government appointed commissioners?
I think it was something that had been on the cards even with the Labor government. They wanted to amalgamate all the councils because they saw how efficient they were. So I don't think it was the Kennett government's idea. I'm pretty sure John Cain wanted to, when he was in government, wanted to amalgamate the councils, and there was such a backlash against that he gave up the idea. But when Kennett got into power, he, with economic rationalism, I think they saw it as a way to cut down costs and streamline things.
So the Shire of Mount Alexander, as we now know it, was a collection of smaller municipal shires that were amalgamated into the Mount Alexander Shire.
That's right, yeah. It was the Shire of Metcalfe, the City of Castlemaine, the Shire of Newstead and the Shire of Maldon were all amalgamated into one council around at that time. But the commissioners were here for about 2 years, and we didn't have much say in what was going on locally.
And how does this connect to the Monster meeting?
Well, we thought at the time, going back to the gold rush days, Castlemaine was then controlled by commissioners, gold commissioners, who were only accountable to the Governor La Trobe at the time, and we thought, oh well, maybe we could do a reenactment of this event that happened in 1851 and use it to express our distaste for being under the control of commissioners again, 140, 50 years later. So that sort of, the idea caught on because there's a lot of passionate people around who were pretty upset about the commissioners being in control. A lot of the councillors had been sacked, and they weren't having any say in what was the decisions that were being made about selling off buildings and money being spent on things that we didn't approve of. So we thought we'd organise this reenactment of the Monster meeting, and we weren't even sure where it had been held in the first place. We thought it might have been out Chewton somewhere, so we decided to have it in Castlemaine, and we started off in Victory Park, and a crowd of people gathered there.
This was 1985.
95. 95,
Yep.
yeah. And we marched up the street and stood in front of the town hall, and we found the original speeches that were made, and we had quite a few speakers who got up on the steps of the town hall and made very passionate speeches, and the commissioners were looking out the window from the top, wondering what was going on.
How many were there of you?
Oh, I think there was probably about 200 people turned up on the day. So we had a horse and cart, and people playing musical instruments. We had a piper and people playing drums. It was quite a big event, and I think the idea got quite a bit of publicity. We'd done an interview on the local ABC radio, and it got written up in a few of the papers. So the idea grew from then, and I think it was early in 2000 we decided to start doing it on a regular basis.
Did the commissioners ever come and talk to you or make any comment?
No, as far as I know, that there was no comment. I think they got the message.
Today in 2012, we're still celebrating the Monster meeting, following on from what you started in 95. Can you describe the arc and the story of what's happened to the celebrations over the years, and how would you describe the place it holds in the minds of people in Castlemaine today?
Yeah, after the original event in 1995, we didn't do much up until what was the year 2000, I think, when we ran the next event. But after that event, there was I think there was still a lot of interest in it, and there was some a bit of opposition to it. Some local historians sort of probably didn't think that we had the story right, and we probably did have it a little bit wrong in places. But over the years we discovered, it took it quite a while to work out the exact spot that it was held in.
How did you do that?
An old map was discovered in the Chewton Town Hall that Barbara James, a local historian, had found this old map, and it actually identified pretty well where the shepherd's hut was.
The shepherd's hut being, for those who haven't heard about the shepherd's hut?
Yeah, the shepherd's hut was the site where the Monster meeting was held. It was mentioned through quite a lot of the literature in the newspapers and reports at the time, but the meeting was held at the shepherd's hut. But the local belief was that the shepherd's hut was further down the road behind an old hotel. People believed that the shepherd's hut was an old building behind the Mount Alexander Hotel, because no one could explain what this building was. And when we announced that that the shepherd's hut was further up the creek, and there was quite a bit of letter writing and that saying that this is not correct. The shepherd's hut is behind the Mount Alexander Hotel, so that caused a bit of, we had to prove, it took quite a while to prove that, we were right.
Where were the letters from? Chewton?
Yeah, mainly old Chewton residents, yeah.
Chewton having been the little town that's now connected to Castlemaine, but still has a very, very separate identity and is known for being just a bit bolshy.
Yeah, well, I guess that spirit has lived on in Chewton and still alive and well, I think. So, and they stand up to anything that they believe is not right.
So there's an argument about where it is.
Yeah,
of
that's
course.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yes, I think in Chewton people argue about anything. They'll argue about two flies crawling up the wall.
So when was the first time the monster meeting was commemorated at the actual site?
I think that would have been 2001. And it was then that we got historians like Weston Bate got involved, and Robin Annear and others started to realise, this was a pretty important event, and we should, commemorate it and get it on the record that this happened. And we started to realise that it started to become known as the birthplace of democracy in Victoria, if not Australia, and it's gone ahead from then. We've had a whole lot of different people have turned up and as guest speakers, and the Ballarat Reform League got involved in the event then, and that gave it a bit more credibility, I think, when they sort of came up with some money to put up a monument and a plaque to commemorate the event, and they saw it as an important event in the lead up to the Eureka event, the Eureka Stockade event, which they saw at that time as being the big event in the political history of this area. But I think in that time we've realised that the monster meeting was the big event that started it all.
One of the speakers at the monster meeting, I think it was Booley, said that not many people understand that a government should be the servant of its citizens. It's a bit of a jolt in thinking to cast yourself back, and that's something we take for granted. But back then, he was pointing it out as something that was a new idea.
Yeah, Robert Booley was a Chartist. He came out here in the late 1840s, and he probably came out here with that in mind. He was very involved in political events back in England, and they were campaigning for more democratic style of government back then. And I guess at that time, people didn't have much say in what was going on. I don't know whether they had the vote in England or not, but certainly the Chartists, that were active in England came out here, and they were played a big role in the early political forming probably the government that we've got now.
There was, some say, an Australian spirit born on these goldfields of independence and of egalitarianism, of the demand for a fair go over this licence. Are you in that school of thinking?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, when you think about it, those people that came out here, they came from, under governments that weren't very democratic, and probably the first time in history that for a brief period people were free to they were free to do and think what they like. They saw that as an opportunity to create something new, and I think they just grabbed the opportunity and run with it.
Do you think this is well understood? Because the dominant history-making legend of Australia is that the character and the spirit of the nation was born on the cliffs of Gallipoli.
No, I certainly don't believe that at all. I think It probably all started, back here in the early, it probably started, in the 1840s and 1850s when a whole lot of people were coming out here and trying to create something new. And I think, those early events in the gold rush were very important in forging that spirit that Australians have of independence and standing up for their own rights. I think that's, we've still got that here today.
Ironically, in standing up for those rights, the gold diggers and the squatters that preceded them were at the same time obliterating the rights of the previous occupants of the land, the Dja Dja Wurrung Aboriginal people. I've never come across any particular literature that recognises in the minds of anybody at the time that's what's going on. Have you?
Yeah, I think one person I've become very interested in is Ludwig Becker. He was an artist, a German artist who came here in the 1840s. He was actually a good friend of Governor La Trobe at the time, but he wrote some very moving poetry about the destruction of the landscape, and he called he referred to the indigenous people as the children of nature, and talked about how their home was being destroyed by people seeking treasure. It's quite a moving little bit of poetry, and it's a story that needs to be told more. I think that.
And it's easy for us to be clever, looking back now with Indigenous rights all over the world, an established idea. There's no argument about it anymore. So I'm not trying to denigrate the ordinary people who were coming here, but was Ludwig Becker a lone voice at the time?
There was lots of mentions of the destruction of the landscape. Some people were horrified at what they saw when they came here and saw which once would have been probably a very beautiful place, totally destroyed in a very short period of time, when virtually all the trees were cut down, the ground was dug over, and it was a very polluted. It must have been a bit like hell, I think, with terrible smells and no toilets. You can just imagine what 20 or 30,000 people, the mess they would have made, and I guess they wouldn't have had any thought at all about cleaning up behind them. And there's quite a few comments about the destruction of the landscape.
So do you know what was in the landscape in terms of trees and other things before the gold rush that we have lost?
Oh yeah, there's quite good descriptions of what the landscape was like, especially when Major Mitchell, the first explorer, came through here. People were able to move through this landscape quite easily. Mitchell travelled up to 10 miles a day, travelling from over near Newstead over to Mount Alexander. I think he'd done that in 2 days. And
that's with what travel?
He was travelling with with drays and horses and a mob of sheep and cattle, and carrying a boat, and they were able to move through here quite freely. There didn't seem to be much to obstruct their passage. Another account I've read recently is about 2 men who came up from Melbourne in 1839. They were going from Melbourne to Adelaide, so they came up through Kyneton to Expedition Pass and picked up the Major Mitchell's trail there. And they came up from Melbourne in 2 days, and they described the land on the way up north of Melbourne. It was just grassy plains. They got up to Mount Macedon. There was thick forest there, which is still the case. North of Mount Macedon, up around Kyneton, was open they described it as parkland, which you could just travel through quite easily. And they got up and they camped at on Forest Creek, which is where the gold rush started, and that was sort of described as a grassy valley. Some of the early maps described that as grassy valleys, and then from there they travelled across to the other side of the Malort Plains over near Talbot in one day, and when they got over there they commented that it was hard to find any firewood over there, so the landscape here has totally changed to what it was back then. Back then it was mostly open woodlands, and now a few people are starting to realise there's possibly more trees in this landscape than there ever has been in the past, because the forests have regenerated so much, and they've become much more thicker and denser. And it'd be pretty difficult to get through here in a horse and dray these days.
It's been documented recently, particularly by Bill Gammage in his book, The Greatest Estate on Earth, How Aborigines Made Australia, that those open plains were continent-wide created by fire stick farming. But it is a surprise to find there's more trees here now than back then, because you just assume that the gold rush voraciously cut down all of the trees. And around here there's so much regrowth. You see coppiced trees everywhere you go. But were there more big trees back then? Because we don't have many big trees now.
No, virtually all the big trees have gone. They would have been cut down for firewood, and this whole area would have run on fire. The only fuel that was available for about 100 years was firewood from the forest, and by the 1880s reports on the forest around here said the forests were totally cleared from Mount Alexander out to Campbelltown, and at that time they had to put a stop on cutting any trees down. They put a ban on cutting trees within a 12-mile radius of the Castlemaine post office, because there's virtually no timber left, and they had to bring timber over from Daylesford. We'd virtually run out of trees.
And when was this?
1880s.
I think that's a surprise that there's more trees here than ever before. You would have imagined that before the gold rush there was more, but it's it's quite nice to know that there's so many trees. Is it a good thing?
I guess it's good and bad, because a lot of the forests are now much more shady than they were in the past, and a lot of species in that don't survive in shade, and there's a lot of concern that some species are disappearing. Also, a lot of concern about some of the woodland birds that were more suited to open forests are disappearing too, and I guess it's got a lot to do with the density of forests, and the forest, and some birds need understory plants to survive in. And it's interesting going back to Bill Gammage's book. He sort of mentions a lot of the early explorers said there was no understory plants in a lot of the forests in Australia, but now it's sort of totally changed, and some of the forest is very dense understory plants, but when the forest thickens up you get a more dense canopy, those plants disappear. So that's a fascinating story. I mean, the forests are just constantly changing things. I don't think they stay the same all the time. It's not a constant thing.
You once mentioned to me, and I'll ask you to mention it again, that this amazing destruction of the land turned upside down. Some people described it as like a big open graveyard after the gold diggings. For how much gold?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. The estimates were that it was probably a bit over 4 million ounces were found in this area. This in the early days of the gold rush, probably a bit, probably closer to 5 million ounces of gold that were being taken out of this area. But when you look at that in volume, it adds up to about 7 cubic metres of gold. So, if you think about the amount of gold that was got here, you could stack it in the corner of your lounge room and still have room to move around. So it's a bit of a false image that's been presented, that the land was full of gold. Gold's a very rare metal and very hard to find. And as research shows, that the vast majority of people didn't find a lot of gold. It was just a few small number of people who did find large amounts of gold because it's so rare. It's you just couldn't pick up bits of gold in the street and that sort of thing. It's a very rare metal, and I guess if you took that 7 cubic metres of gold and spread it back over the landscape, it'd still be just as hard to find.
And this gold field was, 10 miles wide and 40 miles long?
Yeah. When you look at the whole of the central Victorian goldfields, I think they got something like 800 tonnes of gold from this area. That was total, from the mining. That amounts to about 40 cubic metres of gold. So, another amazing fact, if you took all the gold in the world and put it together in one spot, you could put it in the back pocket of the MCG and still play a football game there. So, or you could stack it on they've estimated that all the gold in the world could be stacked on a tennis court. It would be a cube of about 19 metres by 19 metres. So,
Yet the Djadjerung people, who called it Kara Kara, placed no value on it at all, according to what we're told.
No, well, apart from a monetary value, it doesn't have much value for anything else. It's a pretty useless metal. Most of it's used for jewellery.
Hence its spiritual value?
To who? For who?
Well, if gold cannot be destroyed and doesn't tarnish, it's the ideal symbolic material to have in your wedding ring, hoping the marriage will last.
Oh, okay. I don't know about that. My marriage didn't last very long.
Where's the gold? It lasted, wherever it is.
Yeah, well, it's still around, yeah. Can't be destroyed, so it's still all there.
But it is an interesting thing to try to get to grips with. Why gold? Why did people who lived with it around their feet for thousands of years ignore it? And why did others give up everything, travel to the other end of the world, risk their livelihoods and risk their lives for gold? It has to have deeper significance than just money.
Well, I often think it's more about greed, People, it's just people wanting to accumulate wealth, and they'll do anything to get it.
But in terms of the Djadjerung people, it was a very fundamental clash between people who saw land as a resource for exploitation and people who saw land as something you belonged to and had to maintain.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's one of the great tragedies that that story hasn't been told properly. It's it's worth remembering. That probably when Major Mitchell came through here, the local Djadjerung people were probably already sick from the effects of smallpox when that had spread down from Sydney, and I asked people to have a think about what those people thought when they were already sick and had probably lost a lot of members of their family, and they see white people coming through, invading their land, and then not long after that you see a lot of squatters coming into the area. They start to cut down trees and probably violate sacred sites, cut down sacred trees. What would those people have been feeling? And then they all get rounded up and put into a settlement over at Mount Franklin, and they lose contact with their land and their sacred sites, and land that they probably saw themselves as part of. And then maybe coming back and visiting some of their old haunts where they grew up, and seeing it virtually torn to pieces, and all their camps are gone, their sacred sites are destroyed. How would you feel?
Yes, I think that's a great silence can answer that question.
Yeah.
How would you feel? Some historians have told stories about Aboriginal people participating in the gold rush, digging here and there, selling possum skin coats to diggers in the cold winter times. But my impression is still they were like desperate refugees on the edge of this Holocaust that had come upon their country and themselves.
Oh yeah, I think that's true. I think the idea of them selling their possum skin rugs, they probably only sold one. That was the one that they had on their back, and probably sold it to maybe get some money to, maybe get some supplies to feed their starving kids or something like that. It's a pretty sad story, and I think there's a few stories I've come across where women Aboriginal women were forced into prostitution. Their men would sell them to the diggers for sex or whatever, for a few pennies or a shilling or whatever. It's a pretty sad story, and I think the idea that they willingly took part in what was going on here, I find that a bit hard to believe. You could imagine someone who's just lost all their family and lost all their links with their land. How would they be feeling?
It leaves us with interesting identity, history and philosophical issues. Most people who live in this area, Castlemaine, Mount Alexander around here, love it for the country, love it for the bequeathment of old buildings from the goldfields. The goldfields, gave us this town, but at the same time, how do you hold in your reality that it was taken off somebody else and now we have inherited it?
Yeah, it's something that's very interesting happening here, and that I've noticed in the last 20 or 30 years. There's been a big change in attitude. We've got a sort of similar sort of thing happening as what happened in the gold rush. I think you've got a big influx of people coming to this area now who have a far different attitude towards the land and the country around here than when I was growing up here. It was all about chopping it down and digging up and exploiting it and selling off. But now that attitude has changed. We've got a whole lot of people coming here now who want to look after the land and care for it, and we've made quite a big attempt to make connection with that Aboriginal connection with the land. We've started to recognise that there were previous occupiers of this land and previous people who cared for the land, and now the council acknowledge that. At their meetings they fly the Indigenous flag on their buildings, and I think people are just starting to understand what has happened to this land, and they understand the tragedy of it all, I think, and that sort of invokes something in them to want to look after the land. We've got a big movement here of land care groups who look after, putting in a big effort into the restoring the landscape. Got something like about 2,000 members of this community now are actively involved in land care and environment groups, and even a lot of the farmers now are heavily involved in restoring their land and protecting their land. So we've sort of gone the full circle from picking up where the Aborigines left off, and we're making a big effort to maybe restore the land back to a little bit to what it was before, and I think that's a pretty good thing.
Well dug, Ralph. thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you.